Her image filled starports and council chambers alike, tall, luminous, crowned in living crystal, eyes like twin suns caught behind calm restraint. Entire species bent their necks when her name was spoken. Fleets moved at a gesture of her hand. Wars ended when she grew tired of them. And yet, for nearly 10 standard cycles, the most powerful being in the Orion Reach had refused to take the throne's final right. She waited. Not for a prophecy. Not for a political alignment. Not for a royal consort bred from noble bloodlines. She waited for one human. I didn't know any of this when I first met her. To me, she was just another alien dignitary standing at the edge of the Interstellar Convergence Hall, watching the chaos of diplomats argue over tariffs, borders, and who'd insulted whose ancestors 3 centuries ago. I was there as a junior human envoy, barely important enough to warrant my own translator drone. My job was simple: observe, record, and try not to embarrass Earth again. That's when I noticed her gaze. She wasn't watching the council floor. She was watching me. Not with hunger. Not with judgment. With patience. Like someone who had already waited a very long time. When the session ended, my escort told me to follow. No explanation. Just orders. 2 honor guards flanked us, their armor humming with restrained force, as we passed through corridors no human had ever been allowed to walk. Finally, we entered a chamber open to the stars themselves. And there she stood alone. "Daniel Mercer of Earth," she said, her voice resonating with harmonics my ears struggled to process. "You are exactly on time." I swallowed. "With respect, Your Majesty." "I'm fairly certain I'm not." She smiled. That smile had ended wars. Valeth did not sit on a throne. She stood beside it, hand resting lightly on the armrest carved from the heartstone of a dead planet. "I rule an empire built on strength, foresight, and continuity," she said. "My species lives long. Long enough to watch civilizations rise, fall, and be forgotten." I nodded slowly, unsure where this was going. "But immortality," she continued, "has a cost. We cease to change. We calcify. Empires ruled by beings like me eventually become flawless and lifeless." Her eyes focused fully on mine. "So our laws demand this. When an empress reaches my age, she must choose a counterweight, a perspective that cannot stagnate." I frowned. "You mean to consort?" "Yes, but not as your species understands it." She stepped closer. A reminder of impermanence, of urgency, of courage born not from power, but from limitation. I laughed nervously. "You've got billions of subjects. Surely." "I have searched for centuries," she interrupted gently. "Among warriors who fear nothing. Among scholars who know everything. Among rulers who command entire galaxies." She stopped an arm's length away, and none of them were suitable. My heart pounded. "So, why me?" She turned toward the stars. "Because humans," she said, "burn brightly because you know your time is short. You love fiercely. You fight hopeless odds. You defy gods, not because you expect to win, but because surrender is unacceptable." She looked back. "You remind the universe that meaning is not measured in eternity, but in choice." The council lost its collective mind when the announcement was made. Some called it madness. Others called it manipulation. A few whispered that humanity had somehow enslaved the Empress. They were wrong. I had no power over her. If anything, she feared me, not as an individual, but as what I represented. Every time I spoke of Earth, of our wars and mistakes and stubborn hope, she listened like a student. Every time I questioned her decisions, she did not punish me. She reconsidered. Under her rule, the empire changed. Borders opened. Lesser species gained representation. Wars ended not through annihilation, but negotiation. Where once fleets were built, now stations were constructed, places for trade, art, and shared culture. Other rulers asked her why she softened. Velith answered simply, because strength that cannot bend will eventually break. And then the final rite came, the ceremony that would bind her reign for another millennium. She stood before the gathered galaxy, radiant and unarmed. By ancient law, the High Arbiter declared, the Empress must name the one she waited for. Silence fell. Her eyes found mine across the vast chamber. I named Daniel Mercer of Earth, she said, voice steady. Not as ruler, not as weapon, but as reminder. I stepped forward, knees shaking. Do you accept this bond? She asked me softly, privately. I thought of Earth, of fragile cities under blue skies, of humanity, small, loud, imperfect, and unyielding. I do, I said, but only if I'm allowed to disagree with you. Her smile then was not the one that ended wars. It was the one that began something new. History would later record that under Empress Velith's final reign, the Orion Reach entered its longest era of peace. They would say the empire became more humane, more alive, and in the footnotes of 1,000 textbooks, there would be a single line many dismissed as myth. She ruled an empire without equal, yet she waited patiently for one human, so the universe would never forget how precious a single lifetime could be. For the first time in imperial history, an empress allowed herself to be seen walking among civilians without guards. She attended human memorial services, standing silently beside families who had lost loved ones, people whose entire lives were shorter than a single breath to her kind. She listened when I spoke of regret, of mistakes that could never be undone, of how humans carried their dead with them because we had no choice but to remember. And slowly, the empire learned something it had never understood before. Mortality was not weakness. It was fuel. When threats arose from beyond the reach, ancient machine intelligences that measured worth only in efficiency, the empire did not respond with overwhelming annihilation. Instead, Velith asked me a question no ruler had ever asked a human advisor before. What would your people do if they knew tomorrow was not guaranteed? I answered honestly. We'd fight, I said, but we'd also protect, evacuate, sacrifice. Not because we expect to survive, but because someone else might. The strategy saved billions. Human fleets, still smaller, still outmatched, were placed where casualties were statistically unavoidable. When alien commanders protested, I volunteered first. Humans always did. The machines were defeated, not by superior firepower, but by beings willing to die so others wouldn't have to. Afterward, in the quiet of her chamber overlooking 1,000 stars, Velith finally spoke the truth she had never voiced aloud. My people feared extinction, she said. So we chased eternity. But you, her eyes softened. You chase meaning. I grew older. She did not. Silver crept into my hair. My hands shook sometimes. And one day, I could no longer stand beside her during long ceremonies. So she ended them early, claiming imperial fatigue, though none dared believe it. When my final days came, the Empress of 1,000 worlds did something unprecedented. She canceled all sessions of state. She sat beside my bed. And when I told her I was afraid, not of death, but of being forgotten, she took my hand in both of hers. You changed an empire, she said quietly. As long as it endures, so will you. When I died, the empire mourned.